what goes down with like, with like being a film critic and, kind of like the process that goes through it, along with like, how to handle like criticism of the criticism as per the panel title. So, I always like to start off this panel just by giving, just like a basic idea of, are we not getting audio? Oh, okay, we are getting out. Good. Just checking. Just checking. Looks good. Okay, so I always like to start off just like explaining, like kind of like the mechanics of how to like write a review. So, like typically, the way that I usually will review a film is I will start off kind of like with my immediate reaction, but then like you give your base reaction at first within the first paragraph, but then after that, the next thing that you would do is basically give the movie its day in court. So basically, like the whole idea is that with your review, you want to make sure that it's informative enough that someone who's reading it will get an idea of what this film is about. And some people like approach this as like, they don't need to describe what happens in the film, or or what's the story about, who are the characters and stuff like that. And a lot of people do this because they naturally assume, well, most people will know about it. Like they'll pick like a Marvel movie, or like the biggest film of the weekend, and they'll just assume that everyone knows about it. And they might for that time, but after a while, they might not remember it as vividly, or chances are they might not have heard of it at all. So the best thing that you can do for a film is to give it its day in court. Explain what happened in the film, and you can get a little bit creative with it as you go. Trying to describe it here and there. Try to give it your own little colorful language. But the important thing is you need to explain what this film is about before you can just start dogging on it or start praising it for whatever is going on within the film. And that's a key point, which is really important, because that allows someone to read your work and look at it and better interpret the perspective that's coming from it. Like, for instance, if you really didn't like a film, if you write your review well enough, someone who might like that film will look at it, look at your review, and say, well, this person didn't like it, but that kind of sounds like the movie for me. Because at the end of the day, that's like the biggest thing that you want from it. The biggest thing that you want from film criticism is you want to inform. Like there's a few different ways you can look at it. Like Gene Siskel used to look at it as kind of being like a beat reporter, which is basically like, you treat every movie like it's a fire, like it's something that happened downtown and you got to report on it like right away. Like, here's how you felt, here's what happened. Here are all the basics. And that's actually a pretty good way, I think, for most people who are starting getting into film criticism, because I've actually like coached a few people through this where they're a little bit not sure about what to say. I'm just saying, just start with the immediate, just immediately what you feel. But then as you go, sort of like build on that and sort of bring perspective for that. And what I mean by like bring perspective to your review is, don't be afraid to use words like I and you. Like, I like this part, like this, I didn't like this scene, this part didn't make me laugh, this part made me cry. Be open about it. Like I think like some people have this idea that when you're reviewing a film, you have to, have this kind of this kind of like, like so that it's not like a first person stance, that it has to be like, like a broad description of what it is. And it's like, no, like that's, it's your review, it's you writing about why you liked or didn't like this, you didn't like this film. You have to let that come out of you, and you have to make it be your own voice. Like you can instruct, like, you can give like, I can give like so many pointers, but at the end of the day, the best advice that I can give to anyone who's writing a film review is to just be honest. Just say what you felt about the film. Don't worry about what the other people are thinking about there, or what your friends might have thought. Just bring it in to what you felt about the film. And that's kind of why I try to, it's easier because I get like advanced screenings and stuff like that, where I don't have to see reviews ahead of time. But even when realizing that, just try to write from what you felt about the film. Like don't just like cite Rotten Tomatoes scores or anything like that. And the other thing too is, along with perspective, is bring something that you can bring to the table. So for instance, if it's a film about like mountain climbing, and that's something that you've done before, or if it's about a particular sport or an interest or a career that you've been through before, bring that into your review. Bring anything that you can. Roger Ebert would often start off his reviews by just trying to give some perspective about, like, oh, this film takes place in Paris. Well, I've been to Paris, and here's, like, my experience with it, because your experience will bring a lot into that review, and it will, well, for one, it will better bring out your voice, and two, it will also bring out a different perspective that you won't get from anyone else's review, depending on how many people have experience with that sort of thing. So yeah, like the easiest way I could say is just break it down to what you like. The easiest way I can say to start a review is just break it down. What did you like? What did you not like? And just find the best ways that you can write that into an essay. And that's like the easiest way that you can go about it. The other thing too is be more descriptive of what you how you interpret a film, because like the one thing that a lot of reviewers will do this is they will run into platitudes. Well, they'll just say general things like this film was a masterpiece, or it was remarkable, or they'll just give like simple declarations of I like the film. And the thing is, that sort of writing, that's this is kind of like what separates your writing of a review from someone who just posted a quick one up on the Rotten Tomatoes audience score, or like a Google user review. Is you got to expand, like, because it takes no effort to say you liked a film. Anyone could do that. You could go up to any film, like Godzilla versus Kong came out, what I liked it, put it up 5 stars, there you go. Anyone could do that. The difference between sort of like the critic and the audience score or whatever you have is basically just the length of how far you're willing to go with how willing you are to watch a film, and how willing you are to write about it, and to expand on that, because like that's like the biggest thing. Everyone thinks there's this huge divide between like critics and audiences, but the thing is, the only huge divide is just by volume. It's basically like critics will watch a lot more films, and they'll write about films a lot more. The audience will they might not watch as many, and they're not as used to writing about it. That's the only difference. And it's such a it's an interesting difference, because it's something that anyone can do. I mean, with all the streaming services we have now that have pushed a lot of exclusive stuff out there, it's easier than ever to get into to watching a whole bunch of different films. With the online platforms we had, with different blogs and WordPress and stuff like that, it's even easier to write about it. So there's all this so there's so much material out there, that it's easier now than ever to to be invested in being a film critic. So then, like, the next question that comes with that is, well then, okay, so I'm writing about it, so how do I go professional? How do I turn this into a gig that I get paid for, and how do and how do I get like advanced screenings and stuff like that? And it's not too hard. Like, it's like I said, it's easier now than it was before. Nowadays it's just a matter of getting your presence out there. And the one thing I would say with that is just write about any film, new, old, just get it out there, get it out on a blog, get it out on a WordPress site, whichever one you do, and just get it out there, because if you have that, that's a starting point. That's it's the same with like writing a book. If you're writing a book, nothing will come of it. You won't get anything published until you just start with something. And if you write reviews, if you get them out there, then people take notice of that. And basically there, it's kind of like moving your way up. Like if you write your own reviews, maybe write for someone else's site. If you know somebody who runs the site, say, hey, can I contribute? And like, okay. And then just set your sites higher and decide that you want to go, to a bigger site, or multiple sites. Like I will say this: if you're considering, becoming more of like a pro with film criticism, you're going to end up writing for quite a few sites, and you're going to be hunting quite a bit. The other big piece of advice I would give with you on that front is save everything that you write, like keep like a big archive of it. And I mainly say this because chances are, a site that you're writing for will go under. and it can go under like inexplicably. Like I've had a, I've had a, like gigs dry up in different ways. Like sometimes they'll just say, oh, well, the site's not profitable, so I want to shut it down. I'm going to sell it off to these people. So I don't think we're going to do reviews anymore. To just ghosting you. Like, and when I mean like ghosting, I mean like the site will just inexplicably shut down. The owner won't return your emails. Thankfully, that hasn't happened to me in like 6 years. So I don't think that's as common. I hope not. But I'm just saying, be prepared, because like this is an industry where you are going to have to jump around quite a lot. And if you do enough jumping around, you can do pretty well at this stuff. So like, and the other big thing I would say too is just like associate with other film writers, just because like for one, it will give you good cred, within like other organizations. But the other thing with that too is that it's just it's just fun. It's just great to know other people who share your interests and like watching a lot of films. That's kind of like the way I've always kind of categorized. Like if you want like a bigger like split of the divide between like the critics and the audience, I would say like the easier way to describe it is like there are people who love movies and people who watch movies that they like. And the difference is pretty similar. Like someone who loves watching movies will watch anything. They'll watch horror, they'll watch sci-fi, they'll watch romance, they'll watch documentaries, anything as long as it's good, they will watch it and they will take it into account and often write about it. Whereas people who just watch the movies they like, they're a very specific crowd. Like, if they really like action pictures, maybe they're not as big into romance pictures, so they're not going to want to watch that. If they're really big into documentaries or like romantic dramas, chances are they might not like, big sci-fi film. And it's not saying like those types like of people like are bad. It's their niche, not quite niche. It's their idea of like what they perceive as entertainment, because like it's what they're looking for in a film. Like someone who is in love with film will look for whatever works in it. If it's a comedy, does it make me laugh? If it's a romance, is it sensual? What is it doing what it's supposed to do, basically? So you'll find there's a lot of film critics generally fall into the camp of people who watch movies that they love. Now, the other thing too is like once you start becoming more professional, you'll start going to more you'll start to get like advanced screeners and stuff like that. Nowadays, because of the pandemic, basically we basically just watch screeners at home. It's basically much easier. But in the days like in the days before the pandemic, with speak like that, I guess, is that we would have a preview press screeners in the theater. So what's interesting about these is that there's two kinds that they do. There's the press screener and then there's the public screener. So the difference is a public screener will be and you might have noticed this too. Public screeners are ones where they will hand out tickets for an advanced screening of a film that's coming up. Like they'll either do like tickets or they'll notify people over email or something like that. And they say, hey, respond in this much amount of time, then you can come to the film. And basically it's a mixture of both like the public there, who, they're marketing the film to, and the press who's going to be there to review the film. So it's a mix of both. Whereas with press reviews, press screeners is basically, it's just critics only. And it's pretty clear, like, when they would decide on when to do like, critics only screenings and, public screenings, because public screenings are ones where they want to get the word out there. They want everybody to come out of that film talking about it and just telling everyone on social media and all that. That's generally the type of screeners that we would get. But if it was for bigger films that would have that would have like major spoilers in it, like like the Avengers films or Star Wars films, those would generally be kind of like closed press screeners. It would only be for critics, and it's mainly because to avoid spoilers and stuff like that. They would cordon it off so that only critics would be writing about it, and then they would tell them, don't spoil these parts of the movie, because we want other people to go in and see this film and not have everything ruined for them. And the thing about that is, it's when you do that, it's kind of more on the honor system. It's basically like, the marketing team will talk to you and they'll say like, don't spoil this stuff. And then it's like, okay, that's fine. It's never been anything like, like signing an NDA or something like that. Although for one film in particular, and I won't mention it here, not to embarrass it, there was one film that we did have to sign an NDA for. And it was mainly because it was kind of like a last minute thing, where they weren't sure if they were going to screen the film or not. Like the studio was really worried about it. So I won't spoil it here for the sake of that film. So RIP. Okay, so you get into writing film reviews. You've kind of gotten used to it a little bit, and eventually you're going to get to the part where you will get backlash. People who disagree with you. Now, when I say handling with backlash, I'm not talking about the people who say like, I disagree. I didn't see this part in the film, or I dislike this part. I'm not quite sure what you saw, but this is what I saw in the film. That kind of criticism is fine. That criticism, in fact, I actually like to see that a little bit more, because then it can give me someone else's perspective on it. And then I can, kind of look at it, the picture in a different way, and sort of reevaluate. That's kind of the point of review. That's why I like reading other people's reviews as well. In addition to writing it, I like to read on it as well. But the important thing is to realize the difference between, the criticism that is constructive and the ones that are not. So typically the ones that are not are pretty easy to spot. They're ones that attack your character. They're ones that will go off into platitudes of stuff that you didn't talk about in the review. And how you deal with that is basically, first off, you got to take into account, where is this person coming from, what made them want to say this, and then deciding like how to read that. Like if someone decides to attack your character, you really don't need to worry about that person's, comments or criticism, or take them seriously. Because honestly, if they're attacking your character over attacking the ideas that you put in your review, it means they have nothing. It means they are going to, like, they have nothing. They're just going to insult you, and that'll be like the end of it. Like, they're not looking for any bigger discussion about what's going on within the film. Like I've had people who will make these comments like that, and they're stupid ones that I don't take too much note of. It's just like, I did a review of the Joker, and somebody wrote a simple one sentence response saying, "Man, I wish someone shot you in the face." And it's like, okay, that's not something to take note of. So then the other thing too is to realize, when they're just insulting you, and not to engage. Basically, if it gets to that level, do not respond to them, because honestly, there's nothing that you can say at that point that's going to change their mind. So I find it's best just to delete their comments at that point, because then it's out of sight. It's not the sort of commentary that you want to bring to the channel. Like, it's easier within like, YouTube and WordPress blogs, where you can monitor for comments like that. Because the important thing too is, like, you want to make sure that the comments that are on your reviews is the type of comments that you want to have, that it's the discussion you want to have. Because the thing is, I did a review of Alita Battle Angel, and I thought it was a decent film. I enjoyed parts of it, but then I started getting a few comments from a lot of people who said like, "Oh man, I really love this film. I can't believe it didn't make this much money," or that not every critic loved it. And it's like, okay, whatever, fine. They like it. That's fine. I left the comment there. The thing about YouTube, though, is they will inform you when a new comment comes in, but they won't inform you when there is a reply to comments. So I didn't know about this until I looked at it a little bit later. But there was one commenter who left a comment saying that, you know what, Alita is the best film that I've seen in 10 years. And it's like, I was like, whatever. Okay, if you really like the film, that's fine. But what I didn't realize is that under that, there were all these replies from people who were saying like, yeah, it was the best film ever. I can't believe that, critics didn't like it. And then there was a reply to that. So like, well, all critics are just SJWs, and they don't really like good films. They just complain about everything. And it kept going on and on and on and on until eventually it got to a point where they were talking about feminazis and stuff like that. And this was something, this was a conversation I did not want on my review. I want people to talk about, film, the actual film when I get into it, and not just, stuff that I did not bring up in the review. None of this I mentioned, and I don't want that talk in there. So you have to monitor it. Like, yeah, like a lot of people say, like, oh man, I can't believe I got a comment. And I'll just be like, you suck. Or it'll just, go off into like 3 paragraphs of a platitude like that. And I'm telling you, right away, don't settle for that. Don't let, it's up to you what you want for your community, and for the behaviors that you want to foster within that, your presence for the films that you review. So be sure to like take note of that. So, in other words, recognize, when there's constructive criticism, and if there isn't constructive criticism, basically don't give it air. Don't let it, dominate the conversation, especially when you don't want that to be part of the conversation. Basically be in control of what you do. Okay. So the other response that you'll often get is, that there is this, this is kind of like an easy thing to talk about, but we'll address it anyway. Is like they will say that, that your review wasn't objective enough. Now, oftentimes when this is said, this is usually code for, I don't like your perspective on a film. And I wish they would say this more often, because like the thing is, like, it's weird. They want to code this language in, and basically saying like, your review wasn't objective enough, or I don't like the bias that you have in your review. And the thing is, like, it's kind of like a weird argument, because objectivity can't be like your selling point, like, of a review. Like, it's a component, but it's nearly impossible to make a completely objective review unless you're just doing a Wikipedia entry. Like, that's the only way, because like objectivity is fact based. It's based on like facts, and an opinion of whether or not a film is good or bad is not a fact. I know a lot of people like to think it is, and there are some people who jokingly like to assume that this is a part of, review. And the thing is, like, it's not. Objectivity it's a part of review. Well, I mean, like, let me clarify. Like, objectivity is a component that you can use in talking about certain aspects of a film, but you ultimately do have to come back to subjectivity. Like, for instance, if you watch a film that has like a lot of special effects, and you didn't like it, you can start off by saying, hey, this film has a lot of special effects. That's an objective statement. It's a film that has, various, special effects shots in it. Everyone can look at it and say, oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of special effects going on here. But the thing is, but then after that, if you didn't like that, then you'd have to say that, this film had a lot of special effects, and it made the film too hard to follow, and I don't really like that in my film. That's subjective. That's not an objective statement after that point. That becomes your opinion, and something that you have to bring into your review. So this idea that you can be objective is kind of weird. It's like this word does a lot of legwork for a lot of people. That and bias, because the other thing too is that everyone has as bias when they have a review. Like I said, you have to give perspective if you want to, stick out with your review, and make sure that it's your voice that's coming out of your writing. That's the biggest thing you want. Because if it's not your voice, if it's just like, a bland objective review, is like, this movie good or bad, you're not really adding anything. Anyone could, like I said, anyone could do that. So don't resort to that. I mean, yeah, don't let it like crowd your mind thinking, oh man, is too much of my bias showing. You can keep this in mind when you're writing your review. Like, maybe if you're very heated about a topic, you might get a little carried away with it, and you might pull back from it a little bit. But the thing is, like, so you might pull back on your bias, but bias will still be there. Like, it's the same thing with objectivity. It's like saying, this review's got to be objective, even though objective is like a usually tiny portion of like what it comes to when it comes to writing a review. So you've got to, balance that out, because like a lot of people are going to throw this weird language at you that, you have bias, and you have objective, and you're not objective enough. And it's it's weird, it's like a Princess Bride moment. It's like you keep using those words, but I don't think you know what they really mean. So, because oftentimes they don't. So at some point, if you get far enough with writing professionally, you will eventually get to a point where you can be recognized by Rotten Tomatoes. And especially right now, getting recognized as a critic by Rotten Tomatoes is easier than ever. Like they've expanded it to, not just, to people who write on the web, but people who also do video reviews as well. So it's expanded out from there, and it's actually, you'd be surprised how many people can, apply for, to be recognized for Rotten Tomatoes and actually get in. And the thing is, once you get in with Rotten Tomatoes, it's kind of interesting what happens after that, because what will happen after that is they will recognize the reviews that you have done on a particular site, wherever it may be, and it's basically Rotten Tomatoes will go in, they will pull out an excerpt of it, and then they will decide, whether it was, rotten or fresh, the red tomato, the green splat. And it's interesting because unless you have like a star rating up there, it's kind of up to them to guess whether or not your review is positive or negative. Like sometimes it's pretty obvious when your review is negative or when your review is positive, but when you fall somewhere in the middle, that's where kind of Rotten Tomatoes falters and saying like, oh, well, did he like it or not? And it's always like funny to me to like, cause I've done like a few reviews like that where I've been like kind of on the fence about a film. Like I like certain aspects of it, but I wasn't quite won over by it. And then Rotten Tomatoes will kind of guess. And sometimes I've heard that you can actually clarify, like if you meant for your review to be negative and they misinterpreted, you can go back and say, hey guys, this was actually negative. Could you change this? But oftentimes, it's often why, you tend not to use like the whole star rating, because the thing is when you review by stars, there's the elusive like 2.5 star rating, whether it's out of like 4 stars or 5 stars. If you review it as like 2.5, it's directly in the middle, and basically Rotten Tomatoes has to guess at that point. It's like, oh, it's just fresh or not, I don't know. So they got to guess on that point. So the other thing too is like the important thing, I think, when you get to the level of Rotten Tomatoes, it's also realizing, how do you read the site at that point? Because the thing is, a lot of people misread Rotten Tomatoes, and it's mainly because of the percentage score. Now, the thing is, the percentage score is usually the only thing that anyone will look at or recognize within Rotten Tomatoes. And basically, like the percentage, for those who don't know, is basically the aggregate score. So basically, it will count up all the reviews that were fresh, and then put that alongside all the reviews that were rotten, and then basically get the percentage from there. So what was the percentage of how many people who liked this film? And the thing is, this is like the one thing from Rotten Tomatoes that gets slung everywhere. Like you see it in advertisements, like online and on television, where they'll say this film is certified fresh, and it has a certain amount of percentage and stuff like that. If you go to any website, you will see just the percentage score. You'll go to like Fandango or Voodoo or any other site that will carry a few Rotten Tomatoes reviews, and it'll just be the percentage. Some of them will show you a little bit more, like I believe Voodoo will actually show you some of the excerpts from the reviews, but they won't actually give you like the link to go read the rest of the review. So for the most part, the biggest thing that everyone sees with Rotten Tomatoes is the percentage score. So they will, they'll see, is it fresh or is it rotten? And from there, people will just form whatever story that they have from there. Like, oh, why was this film rotten? Well, here's my tale. I believe, and then they will go into their little spiel about why critics felt this way about it. But the thing is, like, it's mostly like speculation, if you're just going off like the percentage scores. What's more effective is if when you go to Rotten Tomatoes and you see that score, you click on the film, you go down to the reviews where the excerpts are, and then you click on the full review and see what they say about it. Because that's like the one thing that gets misinterpreted from Rotten Tomatoes the most, is that it's just read for the percentage score when it should really be seen as just, the collection of reviews from it. So you can see like, oh, well, a lot of people like this film. Well, why was that? Well, you scroll down and you click on one of the reviews and you read it, and then you can get an idea of why, these people didn't, why these people didn't like it and why these people liked it, what works in the film, what doesn't. So there's all this nuance to it that, that can't be attained from a percentage score. People also misinterpret what the percentage score is. Like they don't even know it's an aggregate. Some people think it's like the average score of what every critic, like every critic just agreed. That's 67%. It's like, no, that's that's not how it works. In fact, if you actually like go into the details, you can actually see that they do list the average score in there, and it's usually not like the same as the percentage. It can differ wildly in that regard. So that's a big thing to keep in mind there. Um, the other thing too is that like Rotten Tomatoes has gone through like some weird changes within the last few years. Um, some of it has kind of been like bizarre in terms of like design. Like they've like it used to be like if you just went to the film itself, like right on the score, it would show you the aggregate and the average just right there. So if someone said like, this is the average score, it's like, no, it's right there, right on the screen there. Now you have to click through like a few different menus to get to it. It looks nice. Like I'm assuming that they changed this for like a design choice or something like that, to make it look like a lot cleaner. Because to be fair, it does look much cleaner than it did years ago. But what's weird about it is how they've kind of like changed the audience score over a while. So for those who don't know, way back in the day when Rotten Tomatoes was just starting out, they used to have like the audience section was kind of more like a lot more like Blogspot. Like when you set up a user account, they basically gave you your own page. You had your archives. You could do reviews of films. You just make posts on there, and you could give a Rotten Tomato score. You could do a score out of like a 1 to 10, and it would show up as either fresh or rotten, and it would be counted as part of like the audience score from there. Since then, Rotten Tomatoes has gone through like a lot of different owners over the years. Like it's been owned by IGN, and then it got sold off to Flixster, and Flixster was the point where stuff really changed because at the same time that Rotten Tomatoes was going on, there was this website called Flixster, and I think Flixster's kind of still around a little bit. I haven't checked in a while. It's like someone check Flixster's apartment. I don't know if might want to check on them. So Flixster back in the day was just kind of like a little bit the same thing as Rotten Tomatoes. It was a site where you could keep track of all your reviews. You could give them star ratings, and eventually they got to a point where you could store your ultraviolet digital copies. This was back when there were tons of places you could put all your ultraviolet copies. In fact, it was so far long ago, like people don't even use ultraviolet anymore. It's now called like Movies Anywhere or something like that. So so when Flixster came about, when Flixster came into purchasing Rotten Tomatoes, basically their format carried over into what we know as the audience score today. So the star ratings, the not interested or the want to see, that was all part of Flixster, and that got migrated over into Rotten Tomatoes. And so basically it basically changed the format into almost kind of like it started off similar to Flixster, and now it's kind of like a little bit closer to like maybe like Google user reviews, something like that. But yeah, basically they changed it to tub of popcorn or spelt tub of popcorn instead of fresh or rotten, and that was part of what Flixster did as well. That was their own kind of like little, I guess we're gonna call it Rotten Tomatoes little like sticker that they would put on that. So yeah, a lot has changed with that. And then the other thing that changed too was they started having verified reviews. So the thing was, before you could just post like your review of a film before it even came out. You could post it up there, and you could say whatever you want. You could say 1 star, this film sucked and all that. So Rotten Tomatoes changed this eventually to make it so that verified users who had like purchased a ticket could make reviews, and that person who got the ticket, confirmed that you saw the film, would have the verification, that these people have seen the film and this is what they thought about it. It's somewhat similar to what like Amazon will do. Amazon will have verified purchase reviews, or reviews that only come from people who bought the stuff. Because before, I mean, like I think you can still do it with Amazon. You can just throw reviews out whenever you want. But yeah, a lot of people took issue with this because that meant that you couldn't count the score up until when the film came out, when people who had seen the film could post a review on that. It's kind of shifted a little since then, but it kind of makes sense because like critics are bound by an embargo as well for certain films. Like big films will generally have an embargo closer to release day. So basically, an embargo is a date for when you can publish your reviews, and if you publish them before that, you get in big trouble. So it's kind of like similar to that, when you gotta hold off till when you can post reviews and stuff like that. And there's been some weird stuff with that too as well. Like for instance, Jurassic was it the second Jurassic World film actually came out internationally, and the embargo lifted before the US audience had a chance to see it, so they couldn't get their reviews out then. There's been some other weird stuff, like I think Tag, the comedy from a few years ago, actually came out in Australia early, and they got all their reviews out. So like, wait, I thought we had an embargo. What's going on here? But probably one of the weirdest reviews, the most weirdest review embargoes, was with Justice League, the 2017 version that came out way back when. So this was kind of a weird thing. So Rotten Tomatoes actually held off on publishing the score for Justice League for about a day. And the reason that they did this was, but after everyone formed their weird conspiracies, the reason was that Rotten Tomatoes was trying to promote this new talk show. And the big thing they wanted to promote on this talk show was the reveal of the tomato meter. And they needed this to be kind of like an exclusive thing, because the tomato meter reveal, you wouldn't have to watch the show. You could just wait and it would come out. But the thing is, they wanted to have it so, they could announce the percentage score when the first reviews came out, but also then, comment on, some of the reviews. This reviewer said this reviewer said that. And the thing is, they had actually done this before with Bad Moms Christmas, which came out a few weeks prior. But it only got taken notice of because of the Justice League film. So what the deal was so here's how this went down. So the Justice League embargo was set for a Wednesday, and then Rotten Tomatoes decided, well, we're not going to reveal the tomato meter, so we're not going to publish the reviews on our site until Thursday, when we can reveal it in our big show that we have on Thursdays, our big talk show, the tomato reveal. So what they ended up doing was so basically reviews of Justice League, they were online, they were on all the publications that that were running them, but Rotten Tomatoes was not running them for a whole day. So then on Thursday they would get the reviews that would come in, and they would talk about the critic score reveal. And then of course the film would come out on Friday, in case that was so. Between then, Wednesday was when reviews would go live, Thursday was when the tomato meter score would be revealed, and then Friday was when the film would come out. So between that weird time, there was 24 hours where you would just have you would have to actually go and read the reviews and not just rely on the tomato meter, which is kind of great because it allowed people to seek out the reviews and actually read them for themselves. I was just relying on whatever the tomato meter said for a while. But of course, if you just read the tomato meter and you just look at that, you could form weird ideas in your head that this was this was a power play by Rotten Tomatoes to make sure that the score wasn't revealed long enough so that Justice League could get more tickets, because Warner Brothers and Fandango had a stake in the company and they needed to make sure that they could get as many tickets as possible. The truth is, it was just Rotten Tomatoes trying to promote their talk show. that was all it really was at the end of the day. So that's like an important thing to keep in mind, like especially within film criticism and people like criticizing film criticism, people can get really heated and like not do the most basic of research on this stuff. So the most important thing I think is that if you want to get into film criticism, is that you basically you take it seriously. Okay, so you basically you're not just into like crack jokes. The last thing that you want to be is cinema sins. Like you might you might have like a decent channel on YouTube that does it, but you won't get taken seriously. Nobody takes CinemaSins seriously. It's nitpicky. It's nitpicky satire, whatever they're trying to mean by that, because like they're legitimate in some of their reviews. But you want to take it seriously. You want to make sure that what you're saying is what you want to say, and not just something that you're saying for a joke, or saying just for a character, or saying just for like satirical purposes, or like an April Fool's joke, stuff like that. So basically, be genuine. Make sure that the writing is a writing that you want to do and that you're comfortable with. And it's going to be tough sometimes, because sometimes you are going to find yourself on the opposite end of the spectrum. You might find yourself in a particular area where you're the only one who loves a particular film, and that you want to write about it. And the important thing is, do not be scared about that. You will feel like you're the outsider, that you're like the only one who likes this film. But if you genuinely like the film, like you're not just like liking on this film because to spite another film, like you're not pulling like an Armand White where you're saying that Jonah Hex is better than Toy Story because I don't watch kids movies or something like that. As long as it's something genuine and it's coming from you, that is the most important thing that you can do when writing a review. So basically, be true to yourself. Don't worry about characters. Don't worry about what other people are going to say about you. I've been in that boat many times before. People think that because I'm a film critic, that I'm in the same boat as everyone else and we all agree on the same stuff. We absolutely do not agree on the same films. I have been kind of the lone voice in a lot of films that were not well regarded. If you want a good example, the first one that I was completely alone on, there was a film by Tony Scott called Domino, way back in 2005. And it was all over the place. It was scattershot. The editing was frenetic, and it was bizarre. There was like changing of time. And I was the only one who loved this film, and everyone else was like, "You are messed up in the head." But then I got my thoughts out there. I like the film, and I still do love the film, and I wrote about it. And then as this was kind of like in the early days of Rotten Tomatoes and online film criticism, is that I started seeing, oh, there are other people who actually like this film. So you will find that that's the great thing about doing kind of like online, find that you're not too alone. You will actually find other people who like a film, unless in the rare case that a film, unless it's the rare case that a film is 0% on Rotten Tomatoes where nobody gave it a good review, chances are there is someone out there who likes the film that you like, even if the Rotten Tomatoes score doesn't reflect that, or the average critic score doesn't reflect that. So don't worry about that. Just be yourself. Don't worry about following the crowd. Be your own writer, because your genuine honesty is what's going to separate you from everyone else. And more importantly, your positivity will actually intrigue people. Like I've talked with people who, like, they say they hate a film, and then I will say like, oh, I actually really like that. And if they're not dicks, they'll basically like, really, and they'll want to know. It's like, really, why did you like the film then? If they're not jerk, like I'm the same way. Like if I dislike a film and somebody loves it, I'm curious why they loved it. I want to either hear about it or I want to read about it. And that should be your goal too. Like you like the biggest thing that I could say to do in terms of, instead of just in terms of not just writing, is reading. Read tons of books on film and film history. Read other reviews, and go even further than that. Read books on film technique, and on special effects, and how do you use storyboarding? How do you frame stuff? What types of cameras do they use? Because the one thing that I've heard from a lot of filmmakers is the one big criticism that I've heard from filmmakers who talk about with film critics is basically they say, "Man, I really wish they would take note of like some of the stuff that not everyone looks at. Like the little details within animation or the or the perfect use of like of sound editing, or just the right cuts or color grading or stuff like that. All these little things that you can take note of that you can bring up in reviews can actually separate you from the crowd who will just say, this movie stinks or this movie's great. It'll give you more to talk about and more to explore and give you more perspective because ultimately that's the biggest thing that you can bring to film criticism is what what can you talk about, what can you bring to me that another reviewer can't. And yeah, like personally I've studied up on like on animation and storyboarding and stuff like that, so like I try to take note of that in some of my reviews, and I try to take note of that in in my writing and stuff that I can bring up, that I can bring to the table. So that's the biggest thing that I can say about that, and don't worry. The other thing too, like I know I repeat this, but it has to be stressed. Don't worry about, those who attack your character or if you're the lone voice who loves a film, because you're not. You're not alone. There are other people who like the films that you like. And if they don't, there are other people who want to hear what you say, who want to read what you write, who want to, take in what you can give them. So that's the biggest thing I can say. Like, it's so easy nowadays to just be cynical. I mean, we are in an age where we're just, coming out of like stuff like, like the Nostalgia Critic and CinemaSins and stuff like that. Just this wave of cynicism because a lot of people love to, to just crap on films and crap on reviews because it makes for easy humor. And it's like it's easier to, take those kinds of shots like that. And the thing is, like, that's, like you can get like a little bit of humor out of like, if you really didn't like a film, you can talk about it to a certain degree. Like in particular, the new version of Hellboy was just so off the rails bad that I just had to laugh at it. It's just like it was so bizarre, but I appreciate what happened with what happened on screen. Like it wasn't a good film, but I can't say that I wasn't bored with it. So it gave me something like that. The important thing though is I haven't gone on a tirade against Hellboy. I didn't like the film. I wrote my review. I got out all my feelings on it, but then I moved on because honestly, I would rather spend my time talking about films I like than films I dislike. Because again, it's not hard for someone to just, rag on films that they dislike. It's like the easiest thing in the world. But if you can talk to someone about a film that you love and can tell them why you love it and just show how much you really love that type of film, I think it works better, to communicate, like, hey, this person actually really digs film, as opposed to, like the red letter medias of the world who, will just be all cynical and they'll crack jokes and say movies are dead, they can't make good films anymore. Those are platitudes that, anyone can do. Anyone can do that. There's nothing great. There's nothing grand about something like that. So that's like, so if you have to take away key points of advice from this panel, I would say it's this. Write genuinely. Don't try to do characters. Don't worry about what the rest of the critics and the press are saying. Write what you feel. Don't let like the negative criticism that isn't constructive bog you down. Don't engage it. Don't give it air. Just take in the constructive criticism that you can use, and don't worry about it. And mainly just write because you love to. Like the one thing that I'm kind of trying to skate around here is that film criticism is not a very lucrative profession. It put it bluntly, it doesn't pay well. So if it doesn't pay well, the important thing is if you're going to get into this, get into it because you love it. write about films because you like watching films, because you love writing about them, because you love the medium, and because you can't wait to see the next film. Like that's the way that I approach every film that I watch. I never go into a film thinking, "Oh man, this is gonna be bad. This is the worst thing ever." But hey, content. No, I when I sit down to any film, I always come in it with the intention that this film will be good. I want to go to the to the theater and have a good time and to see a great film. I like why would I want to go see a bad film? You don't want to waste your time. I mean, I want to give films a chance. I'm glad that they come into the theater, even the bad films, so that I can get a chance to see them. And that's the other thing too. I don't want to like do anything stupid like ban bad films or something like that. I want films to have enough of a right to play so that I can have the ability to see it, write about it, and tell people that there's better stuff out there. All right, so that that kind of like concludes like the big part of the panel there. So I guess we could go to reading chat, if that's okay. If there are any questions that anyone has that they wanted to bring up in the panel, like we can talk about them now. So like I'll just take like a quick peering over here for like the 10 minutes that we've got in the remainder of the panel. So let's see. I know Aquaman. We got from Lord Cthulhu says, I know Aquaman isn't great, but its special effects are almost Oscar worthy, and the camera work is top notch, and almost carry the questionable script writing. And even bad films sometimes have things to praise about them. Yeah, I kind of felt the same way about I'll get a little bit more into my review of Aquaman, but I kind of felt the same way about Aquaman. Like yeah, it's a big dumb spectacle, but it's if it's gonna be that, it has everything. It has like underwater sequences and battles and seahorses and octopuses and lasers and robots and all this crazy crap. And it's all shoved in there in under 3 hours, and I kind of admire like how it is in its assembly. Like script wise, I have problems with it. Like yeah, it's when you consider the role of like the ocean in terms of its war with the surface, that kind of war kind of gets I didn't want to say the pun, but gets washed aside a bit for just like the internal struggles of of Aquaman fighting the Ocean Master. Um, but it works for just being the spectacle. I mean, like the script of like like I said, yeah, the surface world war doesn't really go anywhere. I wish it did because it would have been more interesting. But there's clearly too much going on under the sea with the trench and the Atlanteans and everything else going on in the film. So yeah, it worked for me. And yeah, that's the other thing too. Is like if I don't like a film, I'll still find something that I can like about it. I will always try to find something to praise about a film, even if I don't like it, because you want to find something. You don't just want to just dog on a film. This is the worst thing ever. I think you got to reserve that type of like scathing critique for just the right film. I don't think you should just like pass it out like candy. All right. So Trisket says, not to stir the pot, but the Snyder version of Justice League. What is your take on when there are two releases of a movie like that? The Snyder cut is weird because like when there are two cuts of a film, I find it interesting, like because like it usually doesn't mean that they cut one out. It's generally not the case of like George Lucas, where whatever latest cut we have is the latest George Lucas cut, and that's all we're stuck with. I generally like when there's director's cuts, because then it's interesting. You can kind of see stuff that works and stuff that doesn't work. So it's interesting when you have director's cuts. There's kind of like a duality of like what the studio wants and then what the director wants, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Like a case where it doesn't work is with Donnie Darko. I think the theatrical cut of Donnie Darko I thought was way superior to the director's cut that came out earlier. The director's cut fills in a lot, but I don't think it carries the same resonance. a more interesting case was what happened with the director's cut of Dune. David Lynch didn't really like the final product of Dune, and he's like, he left his name on it. It's like, okay, you know, it's my film, but whatever. It's as best as it could be, but he didn't really like working on it. So then when they came out with the director's cut, which added more of his footage so that it could be extended to play on television, and he basically wanted his name taken off of it. So like, it's weird. So like, so you can't call it a director's cut because the director wanted his name off it. So they put on like the Alan Smithy, which is a pseudonym whenever, you know, a director takes his name off a project. So yeah, it's bizarre like that. It's weird. Like, it depends. Like, it's interesting to compare them, but I think it ultimately depends. Like, you know, which film makes you feel more, or which film you know resonates a lot more. With Justice League, it's weird because I think like the Snyder cut, it improves on a lot from like the theatrical cut. Like, it fills in a lot of the blanks, but it's the most Zack Snydery of Zack Snyder films ever made. So like the exposition is off the charts, the slow motion is off the charts, the Christ allegories are off the charts. So it has its own set of problems. So I'm kind of like in the middle there. It's like it's a little bit better, but I don't know. Like, it depends on that. I will say though, I did like the Donner cut of Superman 2, even though that was mostly kind of like assembled. It had to be recreated more or less, but it actually turned out really well. Let's see. Shikaru says, I agree. We shouldn't stop bad films from hitting theaters. Sometimes those films get a huge cult following. Absolutely. Perfect example. I'll just admit it right off the bat. I love the film Cats. Cats is a ridiculous film. It's absolutely absurd, but man, did I enjoy laughing at it and just watching the bizarre spectacle on screen that I would not hesitate for a moment to go see a midnight screener of Cats. When theaters are like back up and running at full strength and we can do midnight showings again, midnight screening of Cats, I am there for it. Everyone sings along, everyone gets up and starts dancing in the theater. That's what I'm talking about. That's the true theater experience, you know. Let's see. Oh, Trisket was going on a little bit more on the two versions of a film. I think they're fine. Like, I will say, like, though, Ridley Scott gets way carried away with it. For those who don't know, Ridley Scott always ends up doing a director's cut. But then we had the deal with like Blade Runner, where there was the theatrical cut, international cut, the director's cut, the final cut, and if you really want to count it, the work print cut, which it shouldn't really count, but whatever. It's on one of the releases. Let's see, Lurk 2, there's also an unreleased cut of Man of Steel and a Peter Jackson cut of Warcraft. The thing though, I got to clarify this though, like when people keep on saying there's director's cuts of stuff, the whole reason that the Snyder cut came about was because they heard there's an assembly cut. And I won't go through like the full explanation of it, but the bottom line is assembly cuts are not finished films. So there was a time for a while when we were reporting every assembly cut, like, oh, Blade Runner 2049 had a 4-hour cut, or The Last Jedi had a 3-hour cut. These were assembly cuts. So basically, it's all the footage like slammed together. Not all the visual effects are done. They might have to cut some more stuff after they do like testing and stuff like that. It's not a finished film. So like all these rumors about different directors' cuts are generally just cuts that didn't make it all the way through. So it's like with the Snyder cut, they said release the Snyder cut. They couldn't release it because it wasn't finished. It didn't exist. But then again, you know, I guess maybe produce the Snyder cut doesn't have the same resonance. Zizi Alapsky asks, what sets tongue tie here. What sets acclimated film critics like Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert apart from the majority of professional film critics? How successful do you think they'd be today? I think they would still be successful. I think if Roger Ebert were still around, he would still try to do his film criticism program, which I think was the best thing that could happen to, you know, promoting films on television was great. Pauline Kael, I think, would get a lot of attention today for some of her writings. Like she's her writing is very polarizing. Like, I love her writing, but there are people who just like she's vicious a lot of times. Um, Honestly, I think today what sets them apart is just um, is like the volume of how much you watch. Like back in the old days, you would have to get set up with like press agencies and stuff like that. You have to go to the theater. You have to hook up with the newspaper. You have to have all this stuff come together. Nowadays, you just hook up with like a good website that publishes movie reviews and pop culture and stuff like that, and you can get in. So like back in the, I mean, like Gene Siskel used to have a saying that the most important thing about film criticism is that you have a platform somewhere to say it. And now that we have like the internet and online publication, it's easier than ever now. So now the only, like I said this earlier in the panel, but the only thing separating, if you're not an accomplished critic between a published or an acclaimed critic is just the depth. Critics will watch more and they'll write more. So if you're willing to do that, you can be well on your way to being a critic. That's all you need. Just watch a lot and write a lot. That's all you need to do. Let's see. Cannot Lord Cthulhu is going on more about cuts. Yep. Yeah, we were talking about that. I get that. Other. Yep. So yeah, we were talking about the director's cut and stuff like that. So yeah, that's whew, my voice is running out. So I'll conclude the panel here. My name is Mark McPherson. If you want to read more of my critiques and stuff like that, you can go to movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, twincitiesgeek.com. That's a local one. And there are other sites, but my voice is running out. So I'll end it there. So thank you. So thanks everyone for coming to the panel. I'll be doing more panels throughout this online detour. So I'll catch you then.